Today on Locked On Suns, the roster is just about set, and with that, we can finally start to look at what this team will be on the court in this upcoming season. What are the best lineups we could see? How can the big three be used? And more in a Suns mailbag edition of the pod. Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Brendon Kleen, your host and a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 7 seasons, as well as the host of the Just Basketball Show. Welcome in. Thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen here on this Thursday. The offseason continues, Summer League continues, Team USA continues, and we have your questions to get to today. Bradley Beal, the rookies, the lineups we want to see, and a trip down memory lane to close things out. Today's episode is brought to you by the Gametime app, the best place to buy any ticket. Here's what you got to do to check out Gametime. Go to the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA when you do to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. All right. Shout out to the Suns subreddit, first and foremost, for your great questions. I'm done with Twitter. We are not doing mailbags on Twitter anymore, and I have a lot of good questions to get to. I also have to cop to something. If you are on Reddit and submitted a question and you're checking this show out and you're wondering, where is Steven? Well, I will tell you, I was an idiot, and I deleted the entire episode that Steven was on. So we'll make do anyway. I will give you my answers solo here, and we'll start with the rookies. From America Josh on the Suns subreddit. Which rookie do you think is most likely to crack the rotation this season, and why? So this is a little bit of a bump off of what I talked about with Brandon Duenas on Wednesday's episode, which was which of the rookies plays the most minutes. But that's a little different, right? Because it could result from injuries and everything else. Oso Ighodaro, I like the most so far. I think his floor is the highest. But I think Ryan Dunn's skill set is the least replaceable, or the most needed by the Suns, I guess is a better way to put it, right? And it'll come down to a few things. You would look at it first and foremost, right, and say, is it Ryan Dunn or is it Josh Okogie? But I think that there's a world in which the conversation becomes more about, is it Kevin Durant or is it Ryan Dunn or is it Bol Bol? For instance, right? Because there's a reason that Nick Claxton worked so well with Kevin Durant on the defensive end. We think about Kevin Durant as being a secondary rim protector. We call Nick Claxton a traditional center, so maybe you would look at the Suns roster and you would say, well, Nurkic or Plumlee, probably the best partner in the front court for Durant. But I think that there's a world in which you could see another level defensively get unlocked for Kevin Durant if he's playing next to, frankly, either Ighodaro or Dunn. But Dunn, we got to be thinking about him just as much as a rim protector, as a help defender, as he is like a point of attack option for the Suns, right? So I could imagine a lineup where it's Dunn, the big three, and Nurkic, where they just go really big. I could imagine the same with potentially Bol, Royce O'Neal, and go a little smaller. There's a lot of different options. So I think the most likely to crack the rotation is Ryan Dunn. And that brings us to simple-minded one's question. What is the most interesting lineup, 5-man unit on the floor that you're looking forward to watching this upcoming season, and why? So I will shout out Steven's answer here because it was a good one, and it was lost to the internet and memory. Some distant server somewhere has it, and I don't have access to it. But what Steven said is Morris, Booker, Beal, Durant, Nurkic. So the starters with Morris. And I kind of have to, we might end up talking about that a little bit next week, Steven and I, because he was on my side of the, hey, they might not need a point guard or they probably don't need a point guard type of argument. And then we get to when push comes to shove, and here he is saying he's interested to see it, which is fair. I think if that lineup can play well, it could genuinely impact how the Suns are going to build and think about the rest of the roster with the moves that they have left to make, right? If the Suns can play on both ends in a style where they have a smaller guy on the court, the ball starts possessions out of the big three's hands more often, but they're still good. They still win. They're still effective on both sides. Maybe, a Nurkic or Allen or Little or O'Neal or a Kogi trade, maybe it does lean a little bit more towards somebody who can play make a little bit. I don't know. But I'm definitely interested to see that one as well. The one that I said, though, that I will repeat here is Beal, Booker, Durant, O'Neal, Bol. All right? And that is the closest to the types, at least in my opinion. That's the best version, the closest version of what we know that Mike Budenholzer tried to do with his Atlanta teams and his Milwaukee teams in terms of spacing the floor, deploying size as much as possible at every position, and everything else. And I think you can see it working on both ends, right? Like you would look at that and you say, wow, that's just like a turbocharged scoring lineup. But I don't necessarily think so. Yes, it would be 5 out. Yes, it would be guys who all can kind of make the right play and play smart basketball on the offensive end. And I would think they would score a lot. But I think it could work on the defensive end too, right? Where maybe, I don't think Bud is a big zone guy, but I think you could see it with Bol as kind of the middle of that and rim protector option within a lineup like that. And, of course, there's size 1 through 4 alongside him to help that zone cover space and clog, driving lanes for the opposing team. But I also think you could play a potentially fairly conservative kind of drop defense where Bol is just, in the pick and roll. He's planting himself at the free throw line or even deeper than that and just taking away the paint. And then you have helpers in O'Neal and Durant and Beal and Booker to kind of, take away driving lanes, take away passing lanes, contest shots off of that. So that would be mine. That's a little bit more. I wouldn't even call it small ball because, you got a 7'2", 7'3" guy in Bol at center. You have Durant at the 4, and, O'Neal's a perfectly fine sized 3. But at the very least, a little more positionless, a little more versatile in terms of the players out there versus the point guard, big 3, center types of looks. Next, why Bradley Beal could benefit from a more defined role and more structure to the offense under Mike Budenholzer. We'll get to that. Your questions on that next. First, today's show brought to you by the Gametime app, the best place to buy any ticket, whether it's sports, comedy, concerts, theater, or anything you want to go to. Gametime is also an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, so if you want to catch the D-backs now that the All-Star break is wrapped in baseball land, check Gametime app out for that as well. Faster, easier, more transparent and upfront than any other app that I've ever shopped on. And I've told you already this week, Friday, Saturday, WNBA All-Star festivities, they are cheaper at Gametime than any place I've seen. I wrote an article about all that you need to know as a Valley resident about WNBA All-Star, and I can tell you that in that moment, the tickets on another competitor were much more expensive than they were on Gametime. Last-minute deals, flash deals, zone deals, and more. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets, whether that's the MLB or anything else, with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, we're keeping it rolling here. Bradley Beal, got 2 questions to hit there. We'll start with his role, his ideal role on this team, which is from Q_N_A. Very good username to have for this one, I suppose. But the question is, what do you see as Beal's optimized role on this team? Is it more of a seamless back and forth with Booker, where they share a similar role, or something more distinct for Beal? Love this question, and I will go ahead and borrow the conversation that Steven and I did have. I hate doing that. I know it's awkward for a listener. I'm sorry. I just legitimately deleted a video, and I am trying to make it up to you guys because these were awesome questions. But I'm like, hey, this conversation that I had that you'll never hear, and I'm referring to somebody who's not on the podcast, here's what we talked about in that conversation. So odd, but here's the answer. The answer is that I think there's a lot you can do with Bradley Beal off the ball. Okay? I don't think it made sense for him to become the point guard of this team. If you remember that tweet from Shams Charania like this time last year, where it was like maybe after the Suns dumped campaign and whatnot, and it was like the Suns will go into training camp with Bradley Beal as their point guard. I called that out in the moment because it never made sense. I feel like it was kind of just a slip of the tongue by Shams going like, that's the smallest player on the team. That will be the point guard. But, of course, there were times this season where that ended up being true. And I don't even necessarily say this about Beal's role just from the standpoint of like trying to have it be a knock on him or be some kind of negative of like he can't do this or can't do that. It's more about what's best for the team, right? So start from the standpoint of Booker is a better playmaker than Beal. I think that's just true. I think he has the instincts for it. I think that he has the approach for it. If he can speed up his processing and get out of that mental lull that we kind of talked about with the Team USA stuff earlier this week, then I think Booker will just be the better guy for that. So that's step one. But the other thing is there were just too many times this season where the Suns did not have enough going on off the ball to stretch defenses, to force rotations, to kind of, just make the most of what they had on the court, okay? And I thought they actually had some good stretches where what they were doing on the ball with the first set of screens that they would run or kind of that first action was pretty good. At times, fairly, I don't want to say sophisticated like they're running the Warriors system or some sort of triangle offense out there, but at the same time, they definitely were staggered screens to attack a switch or, something with like a Spain pick and roll where somebody's popping out at the same time that another player is rolling, and just multiple screens, multiple kind of initial actions with different guys handling the ball. It was good enough. But Beal is the best player on this team to add another dimension on top of that. Okay? The roster is going to be the same here. Okay? And I think this is especially true if O'Neal ends up starting, which, we're not positive about, but we'll see. I think it still probably makes the most sense to do, and you don't have Allen on the court. That means Beal is even more so the best guy to be put into these types of situations, whether that is an off-ball screen, he's a good cutter, so even if you're just sort of adjusting his mentality a little bit in order to have him punish that space a little bit more, put him as a floor spacer in places that make the defense have to think even more. Mentality shift-wise, again, just taking more threes. He's the chess piece that I think, because he can, break a defense down if the ball gets swung to him on the second side. He can run a quick kind of second side pick and roll and things like that. But he also is a very good spot-up shooter. He also is a very good cutter. He just has the most juice in that position. When you think, okay, Booker's going to be the point guard, like we said, they're going to use Nurkic as a screener for sure on the ball, as well as a, secondary kind of ball handling playmaking option at times and a roller and all that. O'Neal, most likely, just going to be a ball mover and spacer. And then Durant is ideally handling the ball at times, being involved in that first action as a screener, as, a mover, whatever you want to kind of say. Beal running around off the ball and just making the defense have to pay attention to him. is probably what you want to do. So that's my answer. That's his optimized role. What's interesting is, if you look at it, his mid-range frequency went down by 6 percentage points, and his three-point frequency went up by 7 percentage points this season. So he was adjusting. He did adjust this year. The ball was in his hands less, as a finisher, as a play finisher, right? He wasn't scoring and putting up as many shots and everything else. So maybe that was just kind of a first step. And this season, with a smarter offensive game plan and better talent around him and another year of keeping that mindset, maybe it just sort of happens naturally. I don't know how much of a big change that would all be. It's just, again, optimizing not only Beal, but how does he play that makes the whole team better? Second question about Bradley Beal from Super Saiyan Cowboy. Hypothetically, if Beal would be willing to waive his no-trade clause, who do you think we could get for him that would be a better fit next to Book and Durant? What player type do you believe would be the best third option? So, I understand the temptation to say a point guard. My response to that would just be to say, the list of point guards, right now when we talk about the point guard, we're talking about adding that to the big three. That's kind of silly in and of itself, right? It's just another small player, somebody taking the ball out of their hands. How are you even getting that player who's good enough? But in a world where, in a vacuum, like Beal wasn't around, I'm just sort of like wish casting, that third star, that other member of the big three. A point guard, sure. If you were to tell me that the Suns could get, I don't know, who's a good example? Someone relatively low usage, but who can kind of make shots, play defense, obviously play make. Maybe you could convince me, it's hard. It's hard. Tyrese Maxey, is that an answer? I don't think it's that player. Tyrese Halliburton. There we go. There's a great example. But, and I know that's, sore spot for fans here. Same with me. But it's a good example. It really would be, that's the type of player. But that's few and far between, and again, not perfect. So I think the real answer is a two-way center, frankly. The place that Steven and I came down was somebody in the mold of an Isaiah Hartenstein or a Jared Allen. And I understand, that is a big step back from a talent standpoint. It is. Those players are not as good as Bradley Beal. They definitely don't have, the upside of a Bradley Beal, but they do fit better. They're playmaking. They're good enough playmakers, but they're low usage. They can just screen and roll, play some dribble handoff, two-man game stuff, and then on defense, they're going to protect the rim. They're a little mobile, so they can execute a variety of schemes, and they just are going to make your best players better and help your defense improve. So I like that still. That's my answer here. But the fact that they would be a step down talent-wise is kind of part of the point, right? That's kind of part of the deal here, where that was always going to be the kind of decision, right? And honestly, even getting a player that good was unrealistic, in my opinion. Maybe you could have done it if you were able to, pile together Shamit and whatever else in a hypothetical world where you don't do the Beal deal and swaps. But even then, that's not probably good enough. So anyway, that brings us to the other part of the question, which is the idea of if Beal were to ever waive his no-trade clause. Look, I'm still not in a rush to trade Bradley Beal because there's no real template for what that type of trade would look like, because so few players have gotten no trade clauses in the recent history of the NBA, and so few players have been kind of in this mode that Beal is in, where they're kind of on the wrong side of 30. They have injury concerns, and they're paid very, very, very highly. Damian Lillard would be one example, but he is another tier above Bradley Beal. I think we would all agree. So the only real comp we have for a trade would be the Suns actually trading for Beal last summer. The first time this same player got traded is really the only exact kind of comparison we can make. So in that case, what did Washington get? They got a bunch of pick swaps, first-round pick swaps, and they got Landry Shamet. Right? So that's what the Suns would be looking at. A, kind of neither here nor there type of role player and some pick flex, some pick assets. That's it. So you're not even getting a player like Jared Allen or anybody like that in a trade. And that's why at the end of the day, you just have to hope that this pans out. I will continue to defend the trade because really if the Suns did not do the Bradley Beal trade, as I've said numerous times now, all that you really are opening up access to is your mid-level exception, right? And maybe, your taxpayer mid-level exception. I've mentioned this example countless times, Dante DiVincenzo last summer, but even now we have a whole other offseason of moves. This year, the guys that got the mid-level, Derek Jones, Najee Marshall, DeAnthony Melton, taxpayer mid-level, I believe Kelly Oubre got that, or he got the room mid-level. Okay, so you get DiVincenzo and Oubre, let's just say, right? Would you rather have that or Bradley Beal? The pick swaps to me are neither, they're insignificant. You would probably rather have Bradley Beal. And right now, would you rather have Beal, or if he did waive his no-trade clause, some random role player and a bunch of pick swaps or picks? You'd rather have Bradley Beal. So it's about maximizing it and figuring out how to make it work. Let's close with a trip down memory lane. My favorite era of Suns basketball. It will surprise you. We'll get to it next. Coming back, let's close out the show. All right. This question is from also America Josh. And he asked, which era of Suns basketball is your personal favorite and why? Now, I will shout Steven's answer out, which was the 7 seconds or less Suns. He had a very smart answer about how the impact that it had on modern basketball is just something to behold. Even all these years later, they were still running stuff that feels new today with, guard screening actions, high drag screens, just spacing basketball concepts that are broken down into simple ingredients that Mike D'Antoni, Steve Nash were 20 years ahead on. Okay. Because I've talked about that era a lot over the 7 years I've been doing this podcast, and we get into the dog days of the summer, and some of these things come up, I will shout out some other answers. So for me personally, in my life, the 2010 team, the surprise conference finals group, and the 2013-14 team that won 48 games and was very nearly, one of the best teams to not make the playoffs. Those two have a special spot in my heart, right? Because the Nash years, I would say I remember like the Ori hip check and things. I was kind of old enough to start having like vivid memories of those groups. But the first couple Nash years, I was just too young. I remember it. Obviously, it was like a fixture and everybody was a fan and fell in love with those teams. But like I'm not going to sit here and say, oh yeah, when Raja Bell hit the shot, I was sitting here on this couch and drinking this, whatever. I don't know. I remember the 06-07 team, but it was really the 09-10 team. And the reason I pair them together with the 13-14 team is it was just both very like motley crew kind of misfit toy rosters, right? Jason Richardson kind of last hurrah. You did have absolute peak Amare, but you also had the very end of Nash. You had Channing Frye bombing threes. You had, the Robin Lopez factor kind of out of nowhere, and it was just a cool group. It was just a fun basketball team, And the 2013-14 team, very much the same. It's like, hold on, Miles Plumlee was prominently featured here. Both of the Morrises, 2 point guards no one else wanted in Bledsoe and Goran Dragic, plus Gerald Green, who is one of my absolute all-time favorite Suns players. Favorite players, period. Athletic 2 guards who just play like, the Tasmanian Devil. I'm down. Sign me up every single time. But yeah, those are my personal, that I have a connection to teams. But the other ones that I always like to shout out when these conversations come up is the 88 and 89 teams. They both went to the conference finals and both lost, which is just brutal. Obviously, the first time to the Lakers and then the second time to the Blazers, and both of those Western Conference teams, of course, then lost to the Pistons in the finals. So, funny little stretch of games there, or of seasons there. But the reason I shout out those two, it's Cotton Fitzsimmons comes back, and it's before, of course, he comes back for the first time. He also had that 8-game stretch in 96-97. And then he came back another time. We'll leave it there. But it was right before the Barkley trade, and it's crazy to look back at those rosters and the stats and everything else and look at the fact that it took them some time to basically level up into the type of team that could go to the finals and push the Bulls and everything else. Dan Marley, Tom Chambers, they're not really taking a lot of threes and playing kind of that loose, quite as loose of a style as the 93 team would end up doing. It was a Kevin Johnson, Tom Chambers team. Marley was young, and, the rest of the role players, Eddie Johnson on his way out, and you're talking about, Mark West and that type of thing. But then you fast forward and they do the Barkley deal, and you look at the stats for those seasons. Marley's shooting 5 threes a game. Ainge is shooting 5 threes a game. Chambers is shooting even less by then. But you add the Barkley 3 threes a game, and those teams were kind of ahead of their time, right? In another similar way like the 7 seconds or less teams. But it's just cool to kind of look at the tinkering over time with that core group of KJ, EJ, obviously Marley, Chambers, and then Barkley kind of being the cherry on top of it all. I just like the kind of trajectory that had, and I think in the 80s there were just so many Suns teams that are kind of lost to time. The 79 team makes the conference finals, the 84 team makes the conference finals, both of those in 89 and 90, and then of course the finals in 93. Always just a little pocket of Suns history that I like to remember. And it's also just a fun reminder that this team has just been good all the time. Outside of when Robert Sarver tried his best to run it into the ground for a decade after Nash left, there were like 5 or 6 seasons from when they made the finals in 76 until they, traded Nash basically, that they missed the playoffs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times. 6 times total. And it's just kind of crazy and cool that this franchise has that level of pedigree in winning. And hopefully we're back to another prosperous era of, 25 years of mostly the playoffs every single season. We shall see. There you go. Mailbag. Appreciate the question. Shout out to the Suns subreddit. You guys always deliver. Apologies that I said Steven would be on. Apologies to Steven for wasting his time. I don't know what's up with me. Vegas and then WNBA All-Star, and I guess just not being in the rhythm of the NBA season anymore. I could not tell you, but I paid a $60 convenience fee when I tried to pay my apartment management company because I didn't notice that that's what it was going to cost to use my card instead of a wire from my bank account. And I just clicked my way through like 5 different screens that tried to warn me that was happening. And then here, I go to download the video to upload it to YouTube for all of you to watch it with Steven, the original, and I just click delete, 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 delete. So either I can't use computers anymore, my brain is just absolutely fried, or something crazy has gone wrong, and I'm in for it. We'll see. Not your problem. Thank you for listening and watching. Hit follow or subscribe if you haven't already. Get a new episode in your feed Monday through Friday, and I'll catch you guys next time.